My name is Lara Winslow, and if there is one thing I have always been proud of, it is my ability to see the real person behind the numbers. I work as a client relations manager at Brightquill Solutions, a data analytics firm in the heart of Denver. The job sounds dry on paper, but in reality, it requires a sensitivity not everyone in this industry can grasp. I have always believed clients do not just need solutions, they need to feel heard, remembered, and sometimes they just need someone who asks how their weekend went. I stayed with this job mostly for my family. My mother had just recovered from a 6-hour heart surgery earlier this year and now goes through regular rehabilitation. I am the primary income in the house, and even though no one says it out loud, I know my mother needs me to stay strong, steady, and ready to handle everything. Medical bills show up from nowhere like an agitated swarm. Because of that, all I have ever wanted was a job that stayed solid, no risk, no sudden shifts. I needed Brightquill, and I thought I had found a place I could build a future in. But things became unpredictable the moment Miranda Kepler stepped into my life as my direct supervisor. Miranda is the type who believes performance is the only measure of value. She loves spreadsheets with perfectly aligned numbers and hates anything that cannot be turned into a chart. To Miranda, clients were units of work, not people running businesses under the same pressure and emotion we face every day. From day one, I felt the coldness in her eyes. When I explained how I managed my clients, Miranda said one sentence I would remember for years. She told me not to bring emotion into the job. I smiled it off, assuming she was just trying to protect her process. But over time, I learned it was not advice, it was a warning. I usually arrive at the office an hour early to manage my work before an endless lineup of meetings. Every morning, I brew chamomile tea for my mother and leave it in her thermos so she can drink it when she wakes up. Only then do I head out the door. Those small rituals reminded me that I am not allowed to fail. I cannot make my mother worry. While I tried to maintain a steady workflow, Miranda grew increasingly irritated whenever she saw me jot down personal details about clients. To me, it was a way to remember who they were and what mattered to them. To Miranda, it was a waste of time. She repeatedly reminded me to follow the department's standard note template, the one that boiled every conversation down to a few cold lines. One time I was making notes after a call with a major client named Terrence. He had been going through a difficult period after losing his father. I simply saved the information so I would know the right moment to check in and avoid topics that might hurt him. Miranda passed by and looked at my screen as if I had committed a violation. She told me I had gone beyond my professional boundaries and that if I continued taking emotional notes, I would be seen as unprofessional. Behind that reminder was a tension I could not fully explain. I always felt Miranda saw me as a potential threat, not because I tried to be, but because major clients started requesting to work directly with me more often. One client, named Jeff, even asked to cancel a meeting with Miranda just to reschedule with me. I do not know how that information was relayed to her, but from that day forward, I felt the air between us shift. Miranda never reacted with open hostility. She chose subtler weapons. She edited my reports without telling me, removing anything tied to personal context. She sent emails recommending procedural changes that would eliminate my working style. She began calling me for sudden check-ins, questioning why my calls lasted longer than the standard limit. I wanted to keep the peace, but I also needed to protect my role. Between taking my mother to appointments and losing sleep over bills, I felt caught between two responsibilities. I needed this job, but I also needed to stay true to myself. Every time Miranda watched me with that analytical stare, I felt the warning in it. She did not like my presence here. One afternoon, David from the data analytics team stopped by my desk for help reviewing a shared client report. While standing there, he lowered his voice and asked if I was all right. He said Miranda had been tense lately, constantly shutting herself in private meetings with upper management. He also heard rumors that the company might undergo a large-scale performance evaluation initiated by the board. The news unsettled me, even though I did not know the details. If the company were under review, even small mistakes could be magnified. And I knew Miranda would want to protect her image at all costs. I left the office that day with a heaviness I could not shake off. When I got home, my mother asked why I looked so tired. I just smiled and told her everything at work was fine. But once I entered my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and let out a long breath. I knew I was stepping into the hardest stretch yet, and something deep inside told me something bigger was coming. I just did not know it would arrive much sooner than I expected. Since that evening, I started noticing every small shift in Miranda's behavior with a clarity I did not have before. Nothing came down like a sudden storm. It was more like steady drops on a metal roof, quiet but relentless. Hard to tell whether it was normal work tension or the early shape of something else forming in the dark. Miranda began requiring me to submit a report after every single client call, no matter how short, simple, or routine it was. I used to send weekly summaries, but now even a 3-minute update had to be forced into a rigid template that stripped every interaction of warmth. Every conversation was squeezed down to dry situation notes, forbidden to include emotion or anything personal. When I asked Miranda why, she simply said the company needed to ensure consistency, but I knew this was her way of tightening control over my work. At first, I tried to comply, thinking it was temporary or part of an internal audit, but within days, Miranda began sending my reports back, covered in red comments. She marked any sentence where I described a client's emotional state and told me to remove anything that was not a data point. I kept rereading each line, trying to see what mistake I had made, until I realized the truth. Anything that reflected my genuine care for clients was considered an error. It did not stop there. During a regular performance meeting, I discovered Miranda had silently altered my previous quarter summary. My contributions to client retention were trimmed down. Emails from clients thanking me were reclassified as team achievements. I knew that if I confronted her, she would twist it as a procedural adjustment. Her influence within the company was too strong for me to challenge outright. David was the first one to notice how cornered I was becoming. One afternoon in the break room, while we rushed through coffee before diving back into work, he looked at me and said, "I look like I have not slept in a week." I laughed and said my mother needed more care lately, but David was not fooled. He lowered his voice and told me Miranda had been stopping by the analytics department often, asking about data tied to my clients. He warned me to be careful, saying she had been tense in every meeting with upper management. The way he said it made me feel that something much bigger was moving behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Jessica, the new hire on my team, unintentionally became Miranda's extra pair of eyes. Jessica was bright, eager, and admired my approach enough to always observe and ask questions. But because she was overly enthusiastic, she often repeated to Miranda everything I did differently from the standard template. She meant no harm. She simply wanted to impress the higher-ups. I could not blame her. What worried me more was the way Miranda's cold smile appeared every time Jessica talked, an expression that told me she had confirmed something she had been quietly suspecting. Through all these changes, pressure built inside me more than ever. My mother needed checkups every 2 weeks, and our medication costs were rising day by day. I came home late, cooked for my mother, then stayed up finishing the reports Miranda assigned. I was so exhausted one night that I nearly fell asleep mid-edit. I needed this job. I needed stability, but I did not want to become a machine repeating lifeless procedures. I did not want to see clients as strings of codes, nor did I want to turn into a version of Miranda. That conflict pulled at me every single day. Then small rumors began drifting through the office like faint whispers behind a closed door. One afternoon, while heading to the parking garage, I overheard 2 employees from finance talking half-jokingly that Brightquill was about to undergo an internal review initiated by the board. One said he saw Miranda leaving a closed-door meeting with a face so tense she could barely breathe. The other said he spotted a restructuring plan on the CEO's desk. I stopped walking when I heard that. If the company were truly preparing for an internal audit, every employee, every department, every workflow would be put under a microscope. And if Miranda felt her position was at risk, she would do everything possible to influence the numbers she thought might hurt her. That made her recent actions toward me feel even heavier, sharper, more intentional. Inside the office, Miranda still carried her usual composure. She directed tasks with the precision of a blade, sharp and controlled. But sometimes, in the moments she thought no one was watching, I saw her restlessness. Her fingers tapped faster against the desk. Her eyes skimmed the documents with an urgency I had never seen in her, as if she were racing against time, trying to patch something that had already slipped out of her grasp. I did not know exactly what was about to happen. I only knew the tension was building, layer by layer, like a balloon being pushed past its limits. And one day it would burst. I just did not expect to be standing at the center when it did. Autumn in Denver always arrives with a mix of comfort and unease. The air turns cooler, the trees shift into bright shades of orange and gold. But inside the walls of Brightquill, there was a different kind of heaviness settling over everyone. It started with an email Miranda sent over the weekend, demanding that our entire department attend the annual strategy meeting on Monday morning. I had been to these meetings many times before, but never once had Miranda emphasized the importance the way she did in that message. It carried a warning, a tone that said something big was coming, and we all needed to be there to hear it. I arrived at the company's small auditorium 10 minutes early. The atmosphere was unusually still. People sat scattered across the rows of seats, each trying to mask their unease. David sat in the back, scanning the room as if bracing for something. Jessica sat close beside me, gripping a small notebook as though she was ready to record every word Miranda spoke. When Miranda walked in, the room snapped into silence. She headed straight for the podium, her heels striking the wood floor with a cold, sharp rhythm. Her eyes were knives, not the eyes of someone preparing to talk strategy. She looked like someone who had already made a decision and would not retreat from it. After giving a brief overview of market conditions, Miranda turned to me. She said I would be presenting the next section, the data system and client care process I had developed over the past year. I stood, feeling every gaze shift toward me. I steadied myself, opened in the slides, and began. I explained how I recorded key personal details, analyzed client behavior to predict trends, and how this system had helped retain several major clients over the past year. Some colleagues nodded gently. I saw David lean forward slightly, as if offering silent support. But Miranda stood beside the projector with her arms crossed, her face carved out of stone. When I finished, she stepped forward as though she had been waiting for this moment far longer than I had ever realized. She began with a dry remark that my presentation lacked professionalism. Before I could react, she projected a series of screenshots from my system onto the screen, filled with the notes I had written throughout the year. She said I had recorded far too much personal information about clients, that I was crossing professional boundaries, and that my behavior violated industry standards. She paused, stared straight at me, and then said that bringing emotion into my work proved I lacked the discipline required for a data technology company. I looked around the room. No one spoke. A few people lowered their heads, avoiding eye contact. The silence was heavy enough to crush breath. Miranda continued, saying I had damaged the consistency of the data, that my approach was not only a burden to the team, but could risk the company's reputation. Each sentence cut through the years I had poured into this job. I tried to stay composed, but all I could think of was my mother lying in treatment, the medical bills stacked inside my living room drawer, the late nights I spent finishing work just to keep us afloat. A wave of dizziness hit me, making my legs tremble. I could not understand why Miranda needed to do this publicly. The humiliation was deliberate, unmistakable, and then it hit me. The moment she had been waiting for was not to embarrass me. She was preparing the ground for something worse. Miranda opened the folder containing the entire system I had built over the past year. She did not explain, did not consult me, did not request any review. She simply said the system needed to be removed because it no longer aligned with the department's new standards. And before I could speak, she moved the cursor to the delete button and pressed it. The screen flashed deletion successful. The room went dead silent. I heard someone exhale sharply behind me, but no one stepped in. Jessica raised a hand to her mouth, stunned. David stared at the screen in disbelief. I stood frozen. The system I had worked on through countless late nights, sometimes until dawn, vanished with a single click. Miranda turned toward me with an icy expression. She no longer saw me as part of the team. Her eyes said clearly she wanted me erased from everything. I forced my breath to stay steady, even as my chest tightened. I thought of my mother, of the fact that I could not lose this job, of the months I had spent working myself to the bone just to keep my family standing. In that moment, I was trapped between fury and despair. I knew that from the second Miranda deleted that data, nothing would ever be the same. At that point, I did not understand why Miranda had to do it. She tried to justify it by saying my system no longer fit the new strategy, but deep in her eyes was something else, something like relief. as if she had just removed a threat she had feared for a long time. What I did not know yet was that the deleted data contained evidence pointing to a series of errors Miranda had been trying to hide since last quarter. Deleting the system was not just aimed at me. It was Miranda's way of protecting herself from the consequences of decisions she had made long ago. I left that meeting with heavy steps, feeling as though the floor had started to collapse beneath me. I had no idea that one click would trigger a chain of events Miranda would not be able to control, and I had no idea that within minutes my life would shift in a direction I never expected. When I stepped out of the meeting room, it felt like I had just left a space with no oxygen. Every step grew heavier, and the sound of my shoes hitting the hallway floor echoed like someone knocking from a distant, unfamiliar place. I did not dare look at anyone. The way people avoided my eyes as I walked out told me enough. No one wanted Miranda's attention just because they showed sympathy for me. I leaned against the cold wall outside the auditorium, trying to steady my breath. Every time I thought about all my data disappearing, a sharp pain spread through my chest, as if something inside me were being squeezed. It felt like the only proof of a year's worth of work had been stripped away in an instant. My mind jumped to my mother's face, pale after surgery, struggling each morning to take a few steps, just as her doctors instructed. I wondered what I would do if I lost my job. I did not have time to finish the thought because my phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the screen. An unknown number from Chicago. I barely had the mental space to care, but something told me to pick up. When I held the phone to my ear, a woman's voice introduced herself as a senior executive from Northbridge Consulting. She said she had been following market reports, noticed several major Brightquill clients mentioning positive experiences with me, and Northbridge wanted to discuss a potential collaboration. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I told her I was busy and would call back, then hung up, still shaken. Before I even exhaled, the phone buzzed again. This time it was Silver Peak Systems. A confident male voice explained they were familiar with how I built client relationship models and wanted to meet with me sometime this week for a senior role. I stood still, unsure how to react, and not 10 seconds later, my screen lit up again. Horizon Metrics, a company I knew well because they were one of Brightquill's biggest competitors. The caller said they wanted to meet me as soon as possible and would fly to Denver if needed. 3 calls, in less than 3 minutes, from 3 competing companies, 3 urgent invitations. I sank onto the small bench nearby, feeling like I was sliding off a familiar surface into something chaotic and unpredictable. I was overwhelmed, not just by the offers, but by how violently the 2 moments clashed. Standing in that room being humiliated by Miranda, and now hearing the industry's top firms rushing to find me. I wanted to feel happy, but I could not. My mother's image kept coming back. If I left Brightquill, could I manage a new job while caring for her? New roles always demanded more, especially in the early stages. I was afraid of change, afraid to step outside the fragile safety I had built for 3 years. But more than anything, I feared Miranda would smear my reputation if I left. She could say anything to protect herself, and in this industry, reputation sometimes mattered more than experience. I was sinking into those thoughts when I heard quick footsteps. Jessica ran up to me, her face pale as if she had witnessed something terrible. She glanced around the hallway to make sure no one was listening, then whispered. Jessica said Miranda had sent a report to upper management before the meeting even started. In that report, Miranda wrote that I had repeatedly violated procedures, taken emotional notes, and caused inconsistencies in departmental data. Jessica said she had accidentally seen the email while printing documents at the shared printer. She hesitated, clearly trying to soften the blow, but finally admitted Miranda had placed all the responsibility for last quarter's issues on me. A cold wave ran through me. It was not just that Miranda had erased a year of my work. She was also building an entire false narrative to protect herself. I did not know what to believe anymore. I looked at Jessica and saw genuine worry in her eyes. She said she admired the way I worked and could not stand to watch me be harmed unfairly. I thanked her, but inside I felt more unsettled than ever. I knew this was no longer a simple clash of working styles. This was a quiet war Miranda had planned well in advance. And if I stayed at Brightquill, not only my job, but my reputation could be destroyed completely. I stood and walked toward the elevator. I had no idea what I would do next, but one thing was certain. I could not let Miranda continue shaping the story however she wanted. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the small mirror, tired eyes, but sharper than they had been minutes ago. 3 calls from 3 major competitors, along with Jessica's warning, had opened a path I never expected. A dangerous one, but maybe the only way out. I pulled out my phone again. The 3 numbers still sat in my recent calls, like doors waiting for me to choose one. And in that moment, I knew what had happened in that meeting room was only the beginning. Everything was about to change. And this time, I would not let myself be swept away without fighting back. The next morning, I walked into the office with a heavy heart and, strangely, a frightening clarity. I had barely slept. The calls from those 3 competing companies kept looping in my mind like a scene replaying itself. Jessica's warning would not stop echoing either. I even dreamed of Miranda standing under a harsh white light, her face stretched with anger, while I stood in the center of a room going dark around me. When I opened my eyes, I knew everything had gone far beyond what I could endure. When I stepped into the office, I sensed something was off. People were speaking more quietly. Some looked at me from a distance, then quickly turned away. I overheard whispers about a department-wide meeting at 10 in the morning, announced by Miranda through an internal email sent at 7. No one knew the agenda, but everyone could guess the real purpose. Miranda wanted to take control of the narrative after yesterday's incident. She wanted to calm the team, but I knew better. She wanted to tell the story her way before anyone else could speak. By 10, people packed into the large meeting room, like birds seeking shelter from a storm. I sat in the third row, far enough not to draw attention, but close enough to watch Miranda's expression. She stood at the front with her posture straight, hands resting on the table like a politician about to address reporters. When the room settled into silence, Miranda began speaking in a strangely calm voice, as though deleting a year of my work had been nothing more than a small procedural misunderstanding. She talked about the company's new strategy, about professionalism, and about the need to eliminate inconsistent work habits. She insisted the data had to be aligned to a single standard for the upcoming internal review. She said the department needed unity and trust in her leadership. I listened to every word, every syllable, and with each one, I saw more clearly how she was reconstructing the entire story. She was turning the destruction of my work into a grand strategic decision. When Miranda shifted to the importance of discipline, I knew I could not sit still another minute. A whole year flashed before me. The nights I stayed up late fixing reports, the after-hours calls I made to check on clients, the careful notes I kept so they felt truly seen. And all of it was erased because Miranda feared losing her position. I stood up. The entire room froze. Every pair of eyes turned my way. Miranda stopped mid-sentence, her brows lifting as if she could not believe I had dared to interrupt her. I drew in a deep breath, feeling every beat of my heart, then said I had something to say. I announced that I was resigning, effective immediately. A wave of silence swept across the room, thick and solid. Somewhere behind me, someone dropped a pen. Jessica raised a hand to her mouth. David looked at me with a mix of worry and respect. Miranda did not react for a few seconds. But when she caught her breath, she launched into an attack so sharp it was clear she had prepared the script long before. She said I could not handle pressure. I did not understand what it meant to work in a disciplined industry. She said I was abandoning the company at a time when they needed unity most. She emphasized that no major firm would hire someone as undisciplined as I. I listened, did not interrupt, did not respond, and when she finished, I looked her in the eye, fear gone for the first time. I said I was not leaving because of pressure. I was leaving because a year of my work had been erased in an act of absolute disrespect. I said a real workplace does not destroy an employee's contributions just to protect a superior's image. Every sentence I spoke made the room fall even quieter. Then the door at the back of the room swung open. The CEO of Brightquill, Jonathan Pierce, stepped inside. Everyone stood. I assumed someone had alerted him about what was happening. Inside the company, people always described him as calm and fair, but the look he gave Miranda was not calm, not this time. He told us to continue the meeting without any explanations. Miranda tried to regain control. She said I had ignored procedures, that deleting the data was necessary to avoid risk during the internal review. But the more she talked, the more contradictions spilled out. She said the system was unimportant, yet claimed it affected the entire quarter. She said I was unreliable, yet admitted every major client preferred working with me. Mr. Pierce tilted his head, his expression unreadable, but it was clear he heard the contradictions. I did not need to say anything else. The truth was revealing itself through her own words. I gathered the documents on the table, adjusted my coat, and walked out of the room. Behind me, Miranda's voice trembled in a haze of frantic explanations. I did not look back. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I did not know what waited ahead, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never forget this moment, the day I walked away, the day everything began to change. I left Brightquill that afternoon feeling both lighter and strangely hollow. But only 2 days later, I signed a contract with Northbridge Consulting. Everything moved faster than I expected. In the first interview, they were clear. They were not looking for an employee. They were looking for someone who could lead the entire client experience of the company. And when they offered a salary 3 times what I earned at Brightquill, along with flexible hours so I could take care of my mother, I knew I had found the exit I needed. What surprised me was not the salary. It was how confidently they said they trusted my abilities without needing anything more than the results customers had already spoken about in the market. On my first day at the new office, I felt the difference immediately. No one looked at me with suspicion. No one demanded that I prove my choices were justified. They simply asked where I wanted to begin and what I needed to bring my ideas to life. The office was smaller than Brightquill's, but everyone was full of energy. For the first time, I felt like I had arrived in the right place, a place where human value mattered as much as data. Within my first week, my phone hardly stopped ringing. Vernon, the business owner I once helped through a difficult restructuring phase. Constance, who ran the textile company whose 15th anniversary I never forgot. And then Brick, the owner of a small but influential chain of bookstores. They all reached out, asking if they could work with me now that I was at Northbridge. I had not contacted anyone, I had not mentioned leaving Brightquill, but they heard the news through industry circles, and once they learned I had chosen a new home, they began considering a move of their own. Their warmth caught me off guard. Some asked about my mother's health. Some said they appreciated how I had treated them in the past. Others admitted they had lost trust in Brightquill when the company's processes became more mechanical. I listened, but always answered neutrally. I did not want to pull anyone with me. I only wanted to focus on my new role. While I was settling into Northbridge, David called me late one evening. He did not text first, just called, like it was urgent. When I answered, he exhaled hard and said I needed to know what was happening at Brightquill. According to him, Miranda had started sending emails to upper management, blaming me for every inconsistency in the last quarter's data. She claimed I had changed procedures on my own, that my notes had disrupted the system, that I had ignored new guidelines and caused internal audit issues. David said Miranda was forcing the entire department into nonstop overtime to rebuild the deleted data system. She set impossible targets, demanding everything be finished so quickly that no one went home before 10 at night. Some employees had begun complaining quietly, but no one dared send an official report. Everyone feared Miranda's attention. The whole department seemed trapped in a silent panic. And there was more. David said Miranda had changed the client communication process into something so rigid that every reply had to pass through 3 layers of approval. Customers grew frustrated, and within days, Brightquill received a flood of complaints. Some said they felt like they were speaking to a robot instead of a person. Hearing David talk, I could not help thinking about the system I had built. It was gone, and they were trying to replace it with something so lifeless it could drag the entire company into crisis. When David told me Miranda kept using my name to explain her recent failures, I felt a strange blend of sadness and relief. Sadness that she still clung to me as a scapegoat. Relief that I had walked away before being pulled into that chaos. I asked David if he was all right. He laughed, said he was holding things together while looking for new opportunities. He told me not to worry about him, but I knew exactly how much pressure he was under. During those days, I received more calls from former Brightquill clients. They complained about the sudden shift in communication style. One said that during their most recent call, it felt like they were speaking to someone who knew nothing about their business, despite years of partnership. Another said they were considering switching providers. I listened, but never gave advice. I did not want to interfere with my former company, nor did I want to give Miranda any excuse to accuse me of poaching. I spent the rest of my time fully focused on my projects at Northbridge. I used my experience to build new processes centered around human connection. I still took my mother to her checkups every weekend, and finally, after months, she told me her health was improving. I knew Brightquill was facing serious problems, but I also knew those problems were no longer mine to solve. I did not need to go back to explain or defend anything. I only needed to move forward. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning of a domino effect Miranda never saw coming. News of the chaos inside Brightquill reached me not only through David, but from sources I never expected. One early morning, while preparing for a meeting with my Northbridge team, I received an email from a former client. He wanted to update me on his business, but before ending the message, he wrote a line that stopped me cold. He hoped I was not upset about what Miranda had sent out before I left the company. I froze. I replied that I had no idea what email he was referring to. Minutes later, he forwarded it. It was a long message Miranda had sent him 2 weeks before the meeting, where everything unraveled. In it, Miranda claimed I was undisciplined, emotional, and that I had altered company processes on my own. She wrote that clients should contact her directly instead of me because I could create data inconsistencies in major projects. I read each line, feeling as if someone had dragged me back in time just to show me the betrayal from a different angle. Miranda had planned everything long before the confrontation. She had not just erased my work in that meeting, she had been building the narrative of me as a dangerous employee well ahead of time. I knew she would protect her position, but I never imagined she would do so at the cost of dragging the entire department into chaos. I thanked the client for being transparent. He said he never believed Miranda because he had seen how I worked for years. But he wanted me to know because in recent days many clients had mentioned the strange shift in how Brightquill was operating. He said several were considering leaving because they no longer felt treated like human beings. At the same time, David's reports became more alarming. The technical team had informed leadership that Miranda had ignored critical sync warnings in the data system last quarter. If she had followed protocol, the inconsistencies would not have escalated into a full internal audit. Instead, she hid them, hoping no one would notice. And when things surfaced, she blamed me in her report to the board. But there was more. Leadership discovered something serious. Miranda had manipulated parts of the department's quarterly report to justify her misallocation of resources. That error caused projected revenue to be so inaccurate that it directly impacted the company's financial plan. When the issue blew open, they ordered a full system review. And during that review, they found Miranda had deleted the entire client system I built without any backups. This was a major violation of data security standards. Even though I had left the company, most of Brightquill's client structure still relied on the foundation I created. Losing it meant losing the ability to maintain personalized communication with dozens of major accounts. David told me that the internal meeting that morning was like a bomb going off. The CEO demanded that Miranda explain herself in front of senior leadership. She tried to remain calm, but the evidence from the tech team, along with the forwarded email attacking me, shredded every defense she attempted. By noon, the board of directors convened an emergency session. Miranda was ordered to step down from her duties and temporarily hand over all responsibilities. I could imagine the look on her face receiving that suspension. The confidence she always wore like armor would not hide the fear once the entire narrative she had built collapsed right under her feet. Jessica called me later that afternoon. Her voice trembled like she had just walked out of a hailstorm. She said the board questioned her about internal procedures. She told them everything, including how Miranda instructed her to adjust parts of the data that did not follow company standards. Jessica said she was terrified of getting dragged into it, but sitting in front of the board, she realized she could not stay silent to protect someone who had tried to destroy another person's reputation. I knew Jessica had shown true courage. Miranda had once used her as a tool to watch me, but when the tide turned, she did not hesitate to tell the truth. Within 3 days, Brightquill received more than 14 formal complaints from major clients. Some wanted to pause collaboration. Some requested project transfers. A few demanded explanations for why they were dealing with a team that knew nothing about their businesses despite years of partnership. Brightquill began collapsing in real time. Data reconstruction failed. Employees were pushed into brutal overtime. Several submitted resignations within the first week after I left. Segments of the client base fell away like a domino chain, hitting every tile in its path. One evening, I sat by my apartment window, watching Denver light up as night settled in. I realized the collapse had nothing to do with me leaving. It happened because Miranda had dragged the entire system toward the edge with her own decisions. I had been the final link she tried to use to cover her mistakes. When that link was pulled, everything she built crumbled the way it always would, and the story was not done. I had a feeling the days ahead would bring even more upheaval. What happened to Brightquill did not make me happy or vindicated, but it made me appreciate my new work at Northbridge even more. As soon as the crisis at my old company began spilling into the market, Northbridge decided to accelerate a long-planned project. They wanted to build a completely new client experience system, one that not only served existing clients but created a signature identity for the entire firm. They put me in charge, giving me full creative control, full authority to design, implement, and train the team according to my own philosophy. In the very first meeting with the executive team, the CEO said plainly that they wanted Northbridge to become the first company in the industry to put people at the center of every process. And the person they chose to lead that shift was me. Hearing that felt like watching the last missing piece finally fall into place after years of trying to make sense of the puzzle. I started by building a comprehensive blueprint based on the principle I had believed in since my first day in this field: humans first, processes second. Not because processes do not matter, but because any process, no matter how optimized, becomes meaningless if it fails to understand people. I spent 2 weeks meeting every team involved: analytics, customer care, strategy, and even the engineering group. I asked them questions no one had asked before. What do customers really want? What do they like, dislike? How do they feel when working with us? I wrote down every insight, not for an internal report, but to build the foundation of a more human-centered system. Once I had what I needed, I built the new experience model. It had 3 core parts: intelligent personalized notes, response pacing based on a client's emotional state, and a human-evaluated touchpoint analysis, not just numerical data. I emphasized that every client had a story, and our job was to understand that story, not crush it into rigid columns of data. Then came the training phase, something I had been looking forward to. I designed a 4-week program blending soft skills, data analysis, and building personal connections. During each session, I used examples from real experiences I had at Brightquill. A few people recognized the clients I mentioned and asked how I remembered so many details. I told them the truth. There was no secret. I simply cared. The team's reaction surpassed everything I expected. They not only learned the method, but they also embraced it. One employee said it was the first time she felt empowered to work like a real person instead of a scripted system. In their eyes, I saw a reflection of who I used to be years ago. That feeling convinced me I had chosen the right path. Results came faster than I imagined. Within 2 months of the pilot, Northbridge's client retention improved noticeably, not through flashy numbers, but through steadiness. No more complaints about slow replies or shallow communication. Instead came thank you messages, constructive calls, and longer meetings about long-term partnerships. Then something unexpected happened. Major industry partners began sending proposals for multi-year contracts with Northbridge, not because of pricing or technology, but because my team offered a sense of trust they could not find elsewhere. A large tech company from Seattle even asked to work with me personally during their onboarding phase, making the CEO look at me with a mixture of pride and excitement. Outside of work, my personal life has finally settled. My mother recovered better. Thanks to flexible hours, I brought her to every appointment without rushing after work like before. She often sat in the living room in the evenings, smiling as she watched me work on my laptop, occasionally asking small questions to make sure I was not overworked. When I handed her part of my first Northbridge paycheck to help with her treatment, her eyes softened. She said she had never seen me look this peaceful, and I was peaceful, truly. No more pressure to prove myself to a manager ready to destroy everything I built. No more fear of my reputation being twisted. I focused only on what I did best: listening and connecting. Some days, Standing by the eighth floor window of the Northbridge office, watching the afternoon sun spill over the buildings, I asked myself why I had not left Brightquill sooner. But then I understood. Without Miranda, I might never have known how far I could go. The pressure she created hurt me, but it was also what pushed me to a place where my abilities were finally valued the way they should have been. And when I saw my team run the new system with confidence, when I heard clients say they felt respected again, I realized I had found what I had been searching for all along, a place where people truly stood at the center of every decision. I no longer belonged to Brightquill, but that did not stop news from the company from making its way to me. Only a few weeks after the board suspended Miranda, I learned that Brightquill had entered the biggest restructuring phase since its founding. The collapse of the data system and the wave of departing clients forced the company to cut 25% of its workforce. Departments were merged, and some were dissolved entirely. The main office shrank from 3 floors down to just one. David told me that on the day the restructuring notice went out, the atmosphere felt thick, like heavy fog clinging to every corner. Some people had expected it, but that did not soften the loss. No one imagined a company that had stood firm for so many years could fall so quickly. But David said something that stayed with me for a long time. If my system had still been there, the fall might not have been so severe. It did not satisfy me, but it gave me a clearer sense of the strength behind the values I had fought for. As I expected, Miranda could not keep her position. Once the evidence surfaced, showing her manipulation of data, her disregard for technical warnings, and her deliberate attempt to blame me, the board had no choice. She was removed entirely, with no chance of reassignment or negotiation. Her reputation suffered a blow she could not recover from. In the data technology field, violating security protocols and deleting a system without backup could end a career forever. I heard she tried applying to smaller companies, but Brightquill's internal assessment of the data breach made everyone hesitate. I knew she was ambitious, but I also understood the cost of blind ambition. When someone uses power to control others, instead of developing themselves, collapse is only a matter of time. I no longer felt anger toward her, only regret that she chose the path she did. One morning at the end of September, I received an email from Brightquill's CEO. He said they were trying to rebuild the team and wanted people with experience and strong client thinking to return and salvage what they could. He asked if I would consider coming back. I stared at that email for a long time. If it had been me a year earlier, I might have said yes immediately. But I was no longer the person who clung to a job just to get through another day. I had found a place where I truly belonged. I replied that I appreciated the offer, but I could not return. I said sometimes a collapse is necessary for something new to begin, and my new path was opening in ways that mattered too much to abandon. That answer brought me a sense of peace, not because I turned Brightquill down, but because I realized how much I had grown. In rare, quiet moments after work, I would sit by the window at Northbridge and think about my journey. I realized every person has the right to choose how they treat others. Miranda chose pressure and control. I chose kindness. I am not perfect, but I never treated anyone like a tool. And if there is one lesson I carried from all of this, it is that kindness may take time to show its value, but once it blooms, it outlasts any cold strategy. I also understood that my success did not come from rigid spreadsheets or mechanical procedures. It came from listening to people's stories, from after-hours phone calls, from remembering the things they cared about, and from putting humans at the center of every interaction. No software can replicate that. No report can capture it fully. One evening, at the end of the year, Northbridge held its employee recognition ceremony. I brought my mother with me. She wore the blue sweater I had given her for her birthday the year before. We sat in the front row, and when my name was called for the Client Experience Innovator of the Year award, she squeezed my hand. Her hand was small and cool, but I could feel the pride radiating from her eyes as I walked to the stage. Standing under the lights, I looked at the faces of my new colleagues, the ones who had believed in my philosophy from the start. The applause echoed through the hall, and I thought about the path that brought me to that moment. None of it had been easy, but if I had to start over, I would still choose kindness, even knowing it would hurt sometimes. Looking down at my mother smiling in the front row, her eyes shining, I felt my heart fill, leaving no room for old sadness. I knew I had lived true to my values, and that was the legacy I wanted to leave, not just for Northbridge, but for myself.